Yeah. So Antal, do you want to start?
Hi, good morning, I will. Verse 22. Whatever appears is your own mind. Your mind from the start was free from fabricated extremes. Understanding this, do not take to mind inherent signs of subject and object. This is a practice of Bodhisattvas. ואני אקריא שוב בעברית. כל ההופעות הן תודעתך שלך עצמך. התודעה מטבעה מתעלה מעבר לכל ההרחבות המנטליות. לדעת זאת ולהישאר חופשי משוויין של סובייקט ואובייקט. זהו התרגול של ילדי הבודהה.
So my impression is that you guys like emptiness. You like it, which perhaps means that we could move a little bit more quickly through concentration and then spend the rest of the semester on wisdom, if you'd like, bodhicitta wisdom, ultimate bodhicitta. But send me some feedback after class, some email if you have things about concentration you want to make sure get covered if you've been hanging out for it, or some things about emptiness that you want to make sure get covered when we go to that section. I can be a bit flexible, especially because you guys have studied concentration before in a fair amount of depth, and now we're bringing bodhicitta to it. It's pretty straightforward. So today we're going to look at on page 3, verses 16 and 17. And so verses 16 and 17 are still in this post-meditation practice of using unfavorable circumstances on the path. So the way to think when you're out of meditation. And now we're moving on to using on the path the 2 things difficult to bear. Being wronged in return for kindness and humiliation. And so verse 16 is, even if a person for whom you've cared like your own child regards you as an enemy, cherish them specially like a mother does her child who is stricken by illness. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. Right, so this is very similar to the 8 verses, isn't it? This should kind of have a lot of points of similarity with the 8 verses, like verse 6, where it says, when someone whom I've benefited and in whom I have great hopes gives me a terrible harm, I shall regard that person as my holy guru. It's really similar, yeah. And then with verse 17, it says, if an equal or inferior person disparages you out of pride, place them as you would your spiritual teacher, with respect on the crown of your head. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So this is very similar again to the 8 verses where it says, when out of envy others mistreat me with abuse, insults, or the like, I shall accept defeat and offer the victory to others, right? It's got that same kind of ring, as well as whenever I'm in the company of others, may I always consider myself the lowest of all, and from the depths of my heart, hold others dear and supreme. So it's an amalgamation of very similar thoughts, just a different author. Yeah, but same mind training ideas. And basically what we're saying here is that there are reasons why people are badly behaved. We know why people are badly behaved. And yet, when people are badly behaved, we react with bad behavior, right? Even though we know the reasons for bad behavior are suffering and afflictions, are ignorance and karma, even though we know that, in the moment of truth, it just acts as a condition for us to generate suffering, negative states of mind, and bad behavior. Unless there's enough mental space, yeah, unless there's enough previous thought qualifying your mental space to react differently. Because our innate grasping at self is so hardwired. Our innate grasping at the self as being inherently existent is so natural, so spontaneous, that for us to react any differently is like a miracle. Because all of our habits have been, imbued with this grasping at the self. So we're always feeling under threat. We're always feeling like something is happening to us. We're always feeling like there's something to cope with. There's something to manage. There's something to kind of get over. There's something to navigate. It always sort of feels like we're just trying to like get through something. And, this whole feeling is because of our lack of understanding our interconnectedness. There's nothing to get through or around or avoid if you're all connected anyway. Yeah, not all one, but connected, very connected. That, it's an interesting thing to explore, because the more you do these kind of thought transformation verses, like 37 practices, like 8 verses, like Wheel of Sharp Weapons, like any of these like Lojong teachings, you have to hit so many different angles of the same idea for it to sink in. It's not the first time we've heard any of this, but we have to hit it from all these different areas and have a little like moment of truth with each version of this relative truth. Yeah, and go, oh, yep, that's really true. That's the way I want to live. And then you'll get off the cushion and you'll forget, which is completely natural, right? But which is why we need so much repetition and familiarity for it to become the new way of thinking. And why we need it to go together with concentration and mindfulness so that we don't forget what we know. Yeah, so it's like there's all of the good work that you're doing with study and reflection and analysis, but for that to pull through into your daily life, there needs to be consistent effort with concentration and mindfulness. Not because you should, but because you'll be more effective that way. So, when you do the wrong thing and you know better, you beat yourself up, like, I knew better than that. Why did I say that? Why did I do that? Because you forgot, right? Because you were distracted. Simple as that, yeah. So bringing bodhicitta to your practice of concentration can give your practice of concentration a lot more reasons. Yeah, a lot more reasons, because to be mindful and focused in a day we've always known is a nice day and is a more effective day. But if you realize your mind training practice won't pull through into your daily life unless you're more focused, and that you won't remember all of this amazing wisdom that you've touched unless you're focused, then when you're working on focus, it's got more energy to it. It's more important then. You feel yourself falling asleep and you say, am I really sleepy and need to just have a nap? Or am I used to associating sitting with sleep? Yeah, let's just take a minute. If I really want to pull my practice into my daily life, I need to wake up. And if I can't wake up, I need to go to sleep. But I need to stop allowing this habit of an in-between vague space of haziness, because it's doing my own practice a disservice. Yeah, I'm doing myself a disservice, my practice a disservice, and my ability to bring through these practices into daily life. So now when I do concentration, let me really take it seriously and not just look at it in a pop psychology, pop Buddhism, worldly way of let's just get a bit relaxed because it's nice to be relaxed. Because if you do it in a very focused, hardcore way, you'll wind up being relaxed. you'll wind up being centered and happy. So you'll get all the side effects you sought. Yeah. But, you know, so it's really trying to give you the oomph to take it seriously. Yeah, take concentration seriously, because you've got the bodhicitta reason now, not just the everyday reason. So just kind of sit with that, but unpacking these verses a little bit. Verse 16, where it says, even if a person for whom you've cared, like your own child, regards you as an enemy, why would someone do that? Yeah, huge afflictions, huge projections, huge confusions, huge suffering. So some of the commentaries talk about this verse a bit like, you know, adopt the attitude that you're like the doctor, and this person has come in with a terrible fever and they're hallucinating and they're thrashing around and they're knocking stuff over and they're hitting the staff because they have a terrible fever and they're hallucinating. The doctor is not offended by that behavior. Yeah, they know that there's an illness present and they just do the best they can for that sick person to not hurt themselves and to not hurt others. So it's like, you as the doctor don't then think, oh, they're just sick and have a fever, I'll let them be sick and have a fever and abuse the staff and hurt themselves. You know, so it's not like complacent. You know, you're thinking, what can I do to minimize the harm? Yeah, you really are. So it's remembering that this is like active non-harmfulness, active non-violence. It's not passive. Yeah, so you know, that's such a common misunderstanding, is that mind training is supposed to make you, I don't know, sit back and do nothing and just be calm and peaceful. And that's not at all what's being said. It's saying if you're calm and peaceful, you can be far more active, far more effectively. Yeah, that mental stability is going to give you strength. And so then when we go into verse 17, this is interesting, because if it says if an equal or inferior person. In 8 verses, it's talking about someone with envy towards you. Envy or jealousy is usually looking at someone who has superior qualities or superior resources, and you're jealous and you want them, or they're jealous and they want yours, and that's why they're attacking you. In this case, it's talking about someone who has jealousy towards you or has pride towards you, both. And it could be someone who's actually your equal as well. But in the commentary, it talks a lot about how if we can have the humility to hear insults without reactivity, our practice is incredibly enriched by that. Yeah, particularly if you get triggered. You know, if someone you consider to be lower or inferior in terms of what? Socioeconomic status, inferior in terms of education or intelligence, inferior in terms of mental development or emotional integration, we pretend like we don't classify people in that way. Yeah, we pretend like we're grand bodhisattvas who say everyone is equal, everyone has Buddha nature. But in the moment of truth, when we're insulted by someone, if we consider them in the back of our mind lower, we have a different reaction than if we consider them equal or higher. We make these classifications all the time. It's important to own that so that we can stop it. To not just jump over and say, no, 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 everyone's equal, Buddha nature, Buddha nature. You know, that's spiritual bypassing. So to recognize your own labeling process, it helps to be insulted because your reaction will tell you how you classified them. Does that make sense? Your reaction to that particular insult will show you, do you see them as below, equal, or higher? And then you can unpack that with dependent arising. You can unpack that by remembering absolutely every person knows something that you don't, has an ability that you don't, has an experience that you don't. You know, even a dog, even a cat, everything is able to do some skill set that you haven't yet learned. Pride doesn't make any sense. And also anything stable about your mental ability or your financial situation, et cetera, is a dependent arising. It all came from causes and conditions. And you weren't like a self-created financially stable person. You learned skills of financial stability. You had enough resources at certain times. Certain things fell into place at the right time. Having kind of excessive ownership and pride and identity as being financially stable or, you know, organized in your worldly life, that's an identity for a lot of people. Yeah, and it gives them a point of looking down on others who don't seem to have their act together, right? Or their health together. You know, why don't you just eat better? Why don't you just exercise more? Well, the fact that you eat better and exercise more is a dependent arising. It's a learned behavior. Many conditions fed into that. So to hold that as an identity point makes you proud and unbearable to be around, right? But it makes you proud. So any point of pride that's kind of like an identity fixture for you doesn't seem to be causing conflict until you meet someone you class as other and less. And so much of this is nonverbal, isn't it? You know, if you think you're a little bit better than someone because of whatever identity point, you may never say it. You may be completely polite and sweet, but they feel it. Yeah, they feel it. And so holding this knowledge of the dependent arising of all of your tools, all of your skill sets, all of your abilities, all of your resources really defeats pride. Yeah. And then if someone who in the world is classed as inferior insults you, there's no target for it to land on. You immediately just see their suffering, generate compassion. Yeah, not pity, not condescending, not patronizing, but just a genuine compassion of that reactivity is born from suffering, just like mine is. So it's similar themes that we've talked about before, but how does it land, these two verses? Look, it can be quite subtle because, you know, we're all nice people doing our best. You know, we're trying to work on all forms of judgmentalness. We're trying to be really accepting. We're nice people, yeah? I don't think that you're nice people. We are nice people. And we're not harsh with folks, and we're probably very forgiving and very accommodating and tolerant and accepting. We're probably really nice people. And there's some subtler levels of this stuff that are worth checking out, because they give us mental stress and they cause us to say and do things that are unskillful and hurt others. Right? So, you know, don't take it like as a scolding or something. Take it as an invitation of, I'm doing well with my tolerance, acceptance, love, forgiving abilities. I'm doing well, thank goodness. However, there's deeper to go. There's more to go with it. You know, and that's really enriching. Because one of the worst parts about pride is that once it's activated, you feel very isolated. Yeah, if part of you way in the back of your mind thinks you're better than the people around you, you're also separate from them, disconnected from them, and don't get the benefit of being with them. Pride is very isolating. Yeah, so the more you can consciously, rationally, logically work your mind into how you really are equal to everyone, then your heart opens and that connectedness is more obvious to you. And it's really enriching and enjoying to be around any kind of people from any background. So if you can just kind of remember, it's in your own best interest, it's in everyone's best interest to kind of actively be on top of pride, especially in Western cultures where, you know, pride, ambition, identity are so celebrated as good qualities. We have a lot to work against in terms of how society is trying to train us to be, you know. So sitting with that. Thoughts?
Chose this verse as a motivational a few weeks ago because I found it very inspiring. The way to think about somebody that I helped and now is mean to me as my child. So it really, for me, it's very helpful to think this way. It can really put my mind in the right place. So I find, for me, it's very inspiring.
We just ask ourselves what's going to get us to soften Yeah, what makes us soften, and thinking of difficult people as a child or our child, we do soften. We just, you see some angry person shouting at traffic, being obnoxious, and then you picture them as a tiny child and imagine what kind of neglect led to that kind of aggression. Immediately you soften, don't you? You just, yeah, I get it. So much of the training is to see sentient beings as our mother, because that's more likely to engender respect and to hold them high. But sometimes there is the invitation to see them as your child instead. And often together with it is then a verse about, and also be careful of your pride, so that you're seeing them as your child, softening, heart open, heart connected, and then you don't run into the danger of slipping into being patronizing or condescending, because usually there's a follow-up verse or a commentary around, and now check your pride. So it's either see all beings as your mother, hold them in respect, or see all beings as your children, but watch your pride. Whatever's going to soften you. Whatever's going to make that, like Pema Chodron would say, right, the tender heart of compassion, which is incredibly brave, right? The soft spot, something to just relax you into an open heart, is actually very brave, especially when you're out and about in daily life and there's so many things that are full of conflict and agitation. To kind of walk around with an open heart is a very brave stance. So what's the gateway for you personally that particular day to make yourself soften? Yeah, or as Roshi Joan Halifax says in almost all of her meditations, and I sometimes say as well, is adopt the attitude of having the strong back and the soft front. Yeah, strong back, soft front. Both physically as a posture and psychologically as a way of being.
And Yönten, just sharing that this kind of practice we very familiar with, and or practice it daily with the the psychoanalyst practice with our patients. This is very similar to the theory of self-psychology, because you don't think of yourself as a self. And all the time when patients come angry, insulting you, very cold towards you, or all kinds of behavior, we used to think that what is his suffering? What is the suffering, and what is the reason for his behavior? What he lost or what he suffered from? This is so. This kind of practice we used to do in the room in our works. I admit that when you are with the outside work, with your colleagues or teachers, or this is harder, much harder to practice.
Yeah, but it is like your self-psychology training is, you're training yourself to look at the vulnerability, to look at the suffering, and then you don't take anything personally, do you? When they say abusive things or say whatever, this isn't working for me, you're talking too much, you're not talking enough, you're saying it wrong, you're doing it wrong, you just, you don't take it personally.
I'm not saying it easy to naturalize the vulnerability of ours, but we practice it all the time, and we understand it that if someone is angry or insulting us, we usually tend to look from his point of view, what is going on, and what maybe happened last session, or all kinds of these things. We're used to practice it all the time. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier than when you are with friends or colleagues, so it's much harder.
I mean, it is so much harder when you're with your peer group, and yet you guys are really lucky that you have session time as like training ground, you know, that you have this sort of work where you do put yourself into that mindset. So at least in a way you're ahead of the game in terms of regular Dharma students, because they don't necessarily have the same kind of work that nourishes needing to be in that headspace as part of the criteria of the work. You know, so in a way you guys are quite lucky because you're training in this all the time. And then, you know, it is the question, how do you keep that open heart in all these different categories of life? Because even if, you know, you're great with these kind of friends about it, those kinds of friends aren't, and whatever, and to ask what is the barrier to the open heart? Or what is the perceived threat my self-cherishing and self-grasping feel that says with this group, I have to protect my heart and I have to block and barrier and guard and react, you know, why? Why do I feel threat? Why do I accept the illusion in this context and not in that one? Yeah, it's very interesting. I was thinking the other day when I was reading this verse about my poor therapist that I had when I was a teenager, when I was like 15, and she was so kind and she was so patient, and you know, she would be basically like, so how's today? And I'd be like, today's terrible, everything's terrible, why are you asking me this question? Just give me the drugs. I was 15, and the poor thing. So she eventually like prescribed some like antidepressants. And then the same day that she prescribed me antidepressants, I went to some like African drumming concert, right? And she was there in the front row, and the African drumming people invited various people in the audience up onto the stage to like dance around and drum. And they pulled me up on stage because I look like a hippie. And so there I am on this stage, like happy and drumming and like singing with these people. And I look down and there's my poor therapist in the front row, just like, I don't understand. I was thinking how patient she was, because I was so reactive to the process, you know, just the process, not even to her, but just like the whole concept. And, you know, I was thinking, oh, next time I'm home, I should look her up and really thank her for not losing it with me, because I think if I'd been in her place, I would have thought, this teenager is so obnoxious. Oh my gosh, this is a rough one. You know, because I was basically psychologically arm crossed for years, just like psychologically like, prove it, you know. And yet I think that her just holding the space for me to be a jerk really helped me stop being such a jerk, you know? And so she would have never saw my progress, because I left therapy before I shifted out of my depression. You know, I left therapy and then I was into Buddhism and, you know, was sorting myself out. So she actually never saw the result of all of that time she spent with me, just holding the space, being kind and accepting when I would, you know, stonewall her and not say anything, when I would give her a tirade of, you know, all of these words about why the world was going to hell, why nothing was ever going to change. You know, and then seeing me in my daily life looking perfectly happy and all of that kind of weirdness. She never saw me better, you know, and yet it had an effect. So I don't know, for you as therapists to know that even if you don't see the effect, there is an effect. There's an effect of what you do, of just being kind to someone who's going through it, you know. Even if you say the wrong thing, or it's not perfectly skillful, or you timed it poorly or whatever, just flooding the space with acceptance is incredibly beneficial, isn't it? You know, just flooding the space with just unconditional positive regard helps, you know? And so take that to heart, that, you know, all of the work that you do, it's having an amazing effect on your own mind and your own practice. But even if you never see the benefit for them, know that there is a benefit, even if they will never name it and never give you credit for it, that it had a huge effect, you know, that it has a huge effect on the world, for there to be one little room where people are trying to heal together. You know, just one little room in one little country, in one little day, one person trying to be accepting and loving and wise, one person trying to heal themselves just that is a very powerful transformative thing in this world, you know. And so to kind of like, it gets so normal, I'm sure, to you guys, it's so routine, it's just your life, that you can kind of forget the profundity of people taking time out of their life to actually examine, why am I unwell? Why am I unhappy? What can I do? Just that is a powerful thing. So sitting with that, it's a bit like what we were talking about on Monday with the power of rejoicing, of just sit with, I'm actually not doing so bad. There's a lot really going quite well, and I don't need to get egocentric about it or proud about it, but I can acknowledge it and sit with it, because it will give me my life back, you know, give vitality back to it, give energy back to it, to name it. It's not something that we're encouraged to do in our culture, despite the fact that a lot of, you know, ambition and self-promotion is celebrated. Still, it's cringy to talk about the good things that you're doing, right? To actually name all of the good things that you're doing in your life, it kind of makes you cringe and feel like, oh, I shouldn't. But to do it while remembering emptiness gives power back to it and helps prevent burnout. So, you know, like this. Yeah, any more about those verses before we go on to concentration? Okay, so we're on page 29, and Monday we did the 7-branch offering, or the 7-limb prayer, same meaning. We're at the top of the page. It says how to meditate. First, arouse bodhicitta with the aspiration to establish all beings in the very essence of enlightenment. Then make the 7-branch offering, prostration, offering, confession, rejoicing, request to stay, request to teach, dedication, and sit properly, adopting the 7-point posture of Virachana. So those kind of components, you know, they can kind of go in whatever order. You know, you might adjust your posture first. You might do the 7-limb prayer and arrive at bodhicitta, or you might start with bodhicitta and go into the 7-limb prayer. The order of these doesn't matter quite as much, as long as you kind of mentally think of them as a tick list before you then stabilize your mind on your meditation object. Does it make sense? So you guys know the 7-point posture of Virachana, basically sit up straight, right? And it could be that you've not been sitting up straight this whole time, and that's okay. But if you can occasionally just see if adjusting a cushion a little bit one way or the other is going to get your spine into alignment, honestly, it does make concentration so much easier. So if you have trouble sitting up straight, not relying on a wall, if you can experiment with your cushions, especially since we're home more than usual, and just like see if maybe a bit higher is going to help, or if you've got some more supports under each knee or something, so that you can see if there's a way to sit unsupported, even for just a few minutes. It makes concentration easier. If you've got really bad back and health issues, experiment meditating lying down. It's actually all right, as long as you don't fall asleep. Yeah, so try some lying down meditation for a nice straight back if your back is really, plays up and you have too much back pain to not rely on a wall. But it makes a difference. Yeah. So, all right. So it says 7-point posture Virachana, la la la. You should then sit there without falling into either slack dullness, which is laxity, or wild agitation, which is excitement. If you can stabilize your mind and make it flexible enough to focus when pointed on any object, your ability to accomplish virtuous deeds will be much greater. Right, this is quite straightforward. Yep. So 3 types of meditation, focusing on specific objects. So this is just an example, focusing on specific objects. Meditate on the form of Buddha Shakyamuni, concentrate on his qualities, and at the end, observe that the mind that concentrates is impossible to locate or identify. Its nature is empty. Okay, so what you do is, like what we do often, is visualize the form of Buddha in the space in front. you know, go through his details. His hands are doing this, his face is doing this, you know, whatever symbolism you remember, you know, you're just kind of building it, and then stabilize. Yeah, so you build the meditation structure. This is completely using your memory. Yeah, so, you know, you might be looking at a video to get cues, but once you have it, then you close your eyes and you bring to mind the memory of the object. You know, so like this little Buddha statue I've had for 20 years, I know it, you know, I know it so well because I've seen it so many times. And so if I close my eyes, I can bring it to the space in front, even though it's sitting behind me. But if I was to try and remember the Buddha statue at Human Spirit, it would just take me a second. I'd be like, oh yeah, that one's white and it's got a little, oh yeah, yep, like, okay. So it's better if you choose an image that you're very familiar with, so that you keep using the same one again and again. So you don't have that whole like, wait, what does it look like? It should be something that you visually have seen many times because you're using your memory to bring it to the forefront of your mind. Yeah, so with any guided meditation that's using video, the video is like a cue to stimulate your memory. And then at some point, close your eyes and hold it in the space in front. And then if you forget, you can, you know, peek and be like, oh yeah, and then close your eyes again, bring it back to the space in front. So don't think that you can't visualize is the point. Meditating on the breath is fantastic, and you can use the exact same formula as here, but to use a visual image sometimes can be easier if you have any issues with your breath. For example, if you're very anxious, or if you're having some bronchitis, if you have the coronavirus, if you have, you know, anything going on with your lungs, or anything related to your breath that has anxiety, stress, or tension with it. Sometimes focusing on the breath eases that. Sometimes focusing on the breath makes it worse. So if you can know how to do visualizing meditation, it's just one more technique in your toolbox. And it doesn't have to be the image of a Buddha. It can be another image, but it should be similarly that size and, you know, bright. So when you hold it in the space in front, clarify its details, stabilize on it. What happens when you stabilize on it? It tries to move, it drifts, it tries to change size, and you say, whatever, I'm just going to keep front and center my intention of what I've decided to see. Yeah. So remember that you can visualize. It's not like some magic hologram is going to appear in front of you. With enough familiarity, visualization of some things does come that easily, and it's quite beautiful. But in the beginning, it is just your memory. You know, if you were to try and remember all of the things on your kitchen table right now, you could bring them into your mind's eye. Yeah, the things that are normally there, the way that the table looks, it's something you've seen a million times. And so you can bring it to your mind's eye and hold your attention on it. You know, so then the trick of the trade is add a Buddha statue on your kitchen table, visualize that, then take away the kitchen table. Right. But, you know, don't kind of psych yourself out, because a lot of people say they can't visualize when they visualize all the time. It's just using your memory. So mental images are like that. So you're holding it in the space in front, and then at the end, you relax the visualization. It can absorb into you if it's a virtuous object, and better if it's a virtuous object. It absorbs into you. And then you observe that the mind that concentrates, that very thing that was looking at the Buddha, doesn't exist from its own side. It's impossible to locate. So you're trying to end each meditation with emptiness. So normally when we talk about concentration, we're just talking about concentration and the faults and the processes and things like this. In this context, we're really aiming at, in the beginning, bodhicitta, at the end, emptiness and dedication. Yeah, start with bodhicitta, get it really solid, as good as you can get. Whatever object you want, it doesn't matter, pick what you prefer, but know how to do a few different ones. End with remembering emptiness. Yeah, and then you can dedicate remembering bodhicitta. So bodhicitta first or emptiness first, your choice, but if you can end with emptiness is really powerful. So it could be the emptiness of the object you're meditating on, it could be the emptiness of the subject that is meditating. It doesn't really matter, but meditate on emptiness at the end of the session is going to really help, because then you're ticking all the boxes of both relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. So it seems like a lot when you read it, but when we do meditations, we often have all these components just woven in, and you've heard it actually many times. Yeah, we'll do some Shakyamuni Buddha meditation, it'll absorb into you, and then I'll say, remember the emptiness of the agent, the action, the object, and done, right? You know, like it's not like a whole song and dance, so don't let it kind of intimidate you. But so that's focusing on specific objects. So we're talking single-pointed concentration here, but it could apply to analytical meditation as well. Just know what you're doing before you do it. So focusing on the antidotes, you've heard this presentation before. To remedy disturbances in your meditation caused by the arising of different states of mind, there are 5 main disturbances to be recognized: laziness, forgetting the instructions, dullness, laxity, and wildness, excitement, lack of effort, and excessive effort. Remedy these with the following antidotes, right? So this is the 5 faults that we've talked about many times. So over the page, on page 30, we counteract laziness in this context with inspiration or faith, endeavor or aspiration, faith, joyous effort, and the refined flexibility that comes through training body, speech, and mind, which is normally called pliancy. So 4 antidotes for laziness. And there are 4 antidotes to laziness because laziness is the hardest one. And once you get over laziness, the rest of it comes pretty easily. So again, don't beat yourself up if meditation's still hard, even though you've been doing it for quite a few years now. It's normal. Just, you know, keep plugging away. So these the 4 antidotes to laziness are sequential. They go in order, so that you first think, I'm inspired to meditate. I want to, right? And then you inspire to do so. And then you have conviction or joyous effort that it works, and that leads to an ease in doing it. There's a question that came into the message. Wouldn't it be beneficial to do the same meditation for a while instead of different every session? Yeah, certainly. I mean, if you, in terms of your own daily practice, unrelated to class time, it's good to have the same thing that you do every time, and then to flesh out a component of it to give kind of life and freshness. So take, for example, say your daily practice is shamatha and the 8 verses. Okay, so that would be a good daily practice. If your practice is to do shamatha for 10 minutes and then read the 8 verses slowly to yourself and then go about your day, that would be quite a good practice. And what you would do is that, you know, you'd do the 7-limb prayer, set your motivation, watch your breath or watch the Buddha or watch the mind, whatever you prefer for your 10 minutes. And then when you read the 8 verses, you would choose one to zero in on and give analysis to, and you'd read the rest of them in an abbreviated way. So it would be like every day you're reading all 8, but one of them would get prominence so that it's more likely to get depth and to integrate and to come into your daily life. And you might use the same one verse, you know, as the emphasis for weeks or months. And then, you know, when it sort of feels like, yep, that one is getting some good connection, now I'm going to look at the next one and give that the emphasis. So there's something about your practice that's identical every single day. And then there's something about your practice that you're choosing to emphasize in order to bring it into your daily life, in order to give it more energy, if that makes sense. So that's a good way to kind of structure it so that you're not overwhelmed by all the possibilities of all the millions of things you could meditate on. You just start doing the same thing every day, but making sure to give it life so that the routine of it doesn't make it dry. In class, we do all sorts of meditations just so you have a concept of the spectrum of possibilities, but it's not like you need to be doing all of them. It's just to know how to do them should the need arise. Yeah, and it might be that, you know, 10 years down the track, you think, oh yeah, that one patience meditation we did a long time ago, I think that's going to be my project this month. I'm going to do that every day for a month. but you hadn't done it for 10 years, you know, but you remembered that it existed, you know, and now you're coming back to it because it seems quite timely for you, you know, something like that. Yeah, yeah. So it's a good time to ask questions about your daily practice if you've had thoughts about just structuring things that are working, things that are not working. So it is easy to get overwhelmed by possibilities and then get a kind of like paralysis. Feeling overwhelmed is quite normal, and then you don't do anything because there's so many possibilities and you're not sure if you'll do them right that you don't do anything. This is really normal. But if you just set your motivation and watch the breath every day, it would be good, right? Just that. Yeah, altruism is good, and the breath, right? Just that, if you did that every day, it would be a very meaningful thing. So don't make it too ambitious or complicated for yourself, or look down on yourself if it's not as sophisticated as you think it should be. Really, continuity and continuous effort is the hardest thing. And if you can get that happening, then you can fold in anything that you want into your practice. Yeah, there becomes a lot of options available. The hardest part, I think, is developing the discipline to do it every day. Yeah, so even if it's very, very tiny, every day is important. You know, and if there's obstacles happening, that's normal, and let's talk about it rather than it just kind of sitting there eating you. So yeah, anyway, email me if you're too shy to talk about it. Okay. Okay, so after laziness, then to counteract forgetfulness, we have mindfulness, remembering basically, both the words and the meaning. Then dullness and agitation, or excitement. It's funny that the translator's chosen to call excitement wildness, but anyway, you get the idea. The antidote to this is alertness to those states of mind. So just the introspection that can catch it. Yeah, notices, catches it, adjusts. When any of these defects occur in meditation, counteract lack of effort by making effort to apply the appropriate antidote. And then when defects are absent, the antidotes are no longer necessary, and you should counteract excessive effort by letting the mind rest in its natural state without antidotes, which is also called applied equanimity. So that's the classic 5 faults, 8 antidotes that we've gone through in a lot of depth. So I think that those are clear enough. And they lead to the 9 ways of settling the mind, which is that picture that you're used to of the, you know, the elephant and the rabbit and the monk going up the trail. Yeah, the 9 stages of mental abiding. Yeah, Sigrid?
Can you say something about the introspection? Because we talked about it last retreat. It's something we're interested in. What do you mean when you write introspection as an antidote for clearing the mind?
Well, you know, introspection it's like the mind watching the mind. You know, it's like a little watcher. And sometimes it doesn't have to do anything because the meditation's going well. And sometimes the meditation is kind of slipping into some laxity, or it's getting agitated into some excitement. So introspection says, oi, even out, right? It says, come back to balance. Come back to balance. So it's like the voice in your head instead of the voice of the guided meditation leader, whoever that is. If you're by yourself, then instead of a guidance from an outside voice, it's your inside voice. It might not even be a word, but it's just, oh, bit too slack, come back. Or, oh, you're getting a bit, you know, flying away, you're going off into plans, you're going off into ideas, come back down. So it's that mechanism that is watching yourself while you're meditating. Because there's so many mental factors present in any mind, you know, they're all getting up to all sorts of things. So it's not contradictory to say, I have attention on this and introspection watching that. They can happen simultaneously because they're both mental factors within the same mind. Yeah, Anna?
Concerning your question, Sigalit, I would like to suggest that one of the ways that we can define without too much boundaries we can define introspection as extricating ourselves from identifying ourselves. That's something that you are doing when you are emphasizing somebody else. To emphasize yourself, you can't, in my mind. But what you can do is to get out of identification, from self-identification. You can look at yourself as if you are not attached to yourself. That's what's happening to me. That's what I'm feeling. I'm not my feeling. I'm not what's happening to me. That's happening, I'm within this, but I'm not this. The extrication of the I and the mine is something that we can embedded in this capability, mindful capability of introspection. Try to see the difference between empathy and identification when you are self-object to somebody else, and try to implement this into the way of introspection. What does it mean to introspect? Not vicariously, to introspect on myself, is to not be attached by identification to myself. Then I can see myself clearly.
Ask Raman, in Yönten, I was thinking that each session of therapy, of analysis, when we are going to ourselves, to our session, each time we are purifying our mind, purifying our consciousness through this, because we are talking about our vulnerability, something like introspection. And when you get empathy, each time we are clearing our mind through this process.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Because if your motivation is altruism, then yeah. Yeah. So.
But we're talking about ourself, self, I, me, what happened to me, my suffering, when we are going through our session, and then we get empathy, and each time the mind, we're purifying our mind, and then start again after one. But this is kind of introspection, because I don't know if I'm clear.
Yeah. When you're the analysant, when you're on the couch, yeah. I mean, I think that again, if it becomes just a trip, then both the analyst and the analysant can be completely lost in afflictions, and it can be a whole ego trip and reinforce your afflictions and be ultimately very damaging, and that's a danger I'm sure you're all aware of. But I think normally both analysant and analyst are exhausting a lot of negative karma that will no longer arise again, and generating a lot of merit, a lot of positive karma that will ripen as happiness. I think definitely that's happening, because the motivation is healing for the benefit of something, however you define it. So I think really only if you're purifying or not, based on what your motivation was that session, either on the chair or on the couch. I think only you really know if that was a purifying session or not. But I think definitely the potential is there, and probably there quite often, for sure. And this introspection of oneself, it's a bit like the difference between having a conversation with someone without thought and having a conversation with someone watching what you say. Yeah, when you're like being careful with a conversation and you're really thinking about what you say before you say it, watching how it lands as it lands, because this is a very important conversation. So there's part of you that is differently awake in a dangerous or important conversation. When you're really watching yourself and really watching the impact, as opposed to when you're just speaking, without any particular agenda except for to communicate something, and you're generally nice, want to do a nice thing when you're talking. But, that introspection that's kind of more awake if the conversation's important, it's that same factor that you're bringing to your meditation that's watching the meditation as you meditate, but doesn't necessarily have to do anything unless you go off track. Yeah, so it's, you know, you can think in terms of percentages of attention, you know, say 80% of your attention on a good day is on, say, the breath, then 20% of your attention is watching your attention on the breath, noticing if you're, you know, drifting in some way. Yeah, and then, you know, making an adjustment when necessary. So, you know, in experience, it might look like alternating focus, like you're going from watching the breath to checking in, am I focused, to watching the breath, to checking in, am I focused? It might feel like some sort of split attention, but sometimes thinking in terms of percentages can help you get there. Yeah. All right, so we have the 9 ways of settling the mind. I'll just read through them because you already know them. So there are 9 ways to place the mind in evenness and acquire stability, and they go in order, they go in sequence. To place the mind on objects of concentration using the strength of having received the teachings is called settling or placing the mind. To place it continuously through the strength of having reflected on and retained the meaning of the teachings is called continuous setting or placing the mind. To place it back again through the strength of mindfulness that swiftly recognizes whenever the mind has strayed from its object focus to something outside is called resettling. To place it closely by repeating gathering it in the mind when it expands due to excessively strong mindfulness, close setting. To tame it when it sinks into dullness, taming. To calm it when shaken by wildness, pacification. To calm it completely, thorough pacification. To place it one-pointedly, single-pointedness. To place it in total evenness, setting in equipoise. So if you can read pages 31 and 32, then we don't need to go through them in class. I think you'll find it interesting and it's quite short. So if you just read those following 2 pages before Monday and just kind of get yourself clicked in. What's different that you might not have read before are these 5 similes over the page, and they're just interesting to know and to reflect on your own experience with. So we'll just take a minute and settle. Okay, so since we don't have class next week, if you want to read the higher training in concentration and the perfection of meditative stability as well during the break, then we'll move on pretty quickly to wisdom after that. But just to get kind of clear in your mind, the added stuff about the perfection of concentration as opposed to just concentration in general. Okay, thanks guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.